There's a particular kind of pain that comes from seeking approval from those who will never give it, from defending a system that has declared you unworthy of existence, from bleeding for those who would rather you'd never been born. In Elden Ring, no character embodies this pain more completely, more devastatingly than Morgott, the Omen King, the last defender of a throne that was never meant for him, the guardian of a capital that considered him an abomination, the loyal son of a mother who hid him away in darkness rather than acknowledge his existence. When we first encounter Morgott in Elden Ring, we don't even know his true identity. He appears as Morgott, the fell omen, blocking our path to Stormvale Castle with righteous fury, condemning us as willful traitors all. Later, when we finally reach the heart of Leyndell, the royal capital, we face him again, this time revealed as Morgott, the grace-given, last of the kings. And in both encounters, something feels profoundly wrong, profoundly tragic. Here is a boss who fights with desperate intensity, who speaks with absolute conviction about the rightness of the Golden Order, who guards the Erd Tree with his dying breath. And yet, this same character was born cursed, hidden underground, denied his birthright, rejected by the very system he now dies to protect. Morgott's story isn't just tragic because he suffers. Suffering is universal in the lands between. His story is uniquely heartbreaking because his suffering is self-inflicted, chosen, a form of devotion to a system that has made clear he will never belong. He could have joined his twin brother Morgott in rebellion. He could have sought power for himself during the Shattering. He could have simply walked away, abandoned a capital that had abandoned him first. Instead, he stayed. He fought. He bled. And he did it all in the name of an order that considered his very existence an affront to its perfection. This video explores the tragedy of Morgott, how he was born, why he stayed loyal, what it cost him, and what his story reveals about the Golden Order's cruelty and the psychological weight of internalized oppression. We'll examine how Morgott represents something deeply human and deeply painful, the lengths we go to earn love from those who have already decided we're unworthy of it. By the time we're done, I hope you'll see Morgott not just as a boss fight, not just as a tragic character, but as one of the most emotionally complex and devastatingly written figures in all of From Software's work. Because Morgott's loyalty wasn't strength, it was a wound that never healed, and the Golden Order kept pressing on it until he had nothing left. To understand Morgott's tragedy, we first need to understand what it means to be born an omen in the world of Elden Ring, and why the Golden Order considers omens to be such an abomination that they must be either hidden or slaughtered. Omens are individuals born with horns and physical deformities, twisted, gnarled protrusions that mark them as cursed from birth. According to the Golden Order's interpretation of the world, omens are beings touched by a primordial curse, their bodies warped by what the Order considers a spiritual corruption. The item description for the Omen Bairn tells us that omens are reviled throughout the lands between, hunted by specialized inquisitors, and that their horns are cruelly excised in a brutal ritual that most omens don't survive. Those who do survive the horn cutting live in agony, forever marked by both their physical mutilation and their social exile. This video explores the tragedy of Morgott, how he was born, why he stayed loyal, what it cost him, and what his story reveals about the Golden Order's cruelty and the psychological weight of internalized oppression. We'll examine how Morgott represents something deeply human and deeply painful, the lengths we go to earn love from those who have already decided we're unworthy of it. By the time we're done, I hope you'll see Morgott not just as a boss fight, not just as a tragic character, but as one of the most emotionally complex and devastatingly written figures in all of From Software's work. Because Morgott's loyalty wasn't strength, it was a wound that never healed, and the Golden Order kept pressing on it until he had nothing left. To understand Morgott's tragedy, we first need to understand what it means to be born an omen in the world of Elden Ring, and why the Golden Order considers omens to be such an abomination that they must be either hidden or slaughtered. Omens are individuals born with horns and physical deformities, twisted, gnarled protrusions that mark them as cursed from birth. According to the Golden Order's interpretation of the world, omens are beings touched by a primordial curse, their bodies warped by what the Order considers a spiritual corruption. The item description for the Omen Bairn tells us that omens are reviled throughout the lands between, hunted by specialized inquisitors, and that their horns are cruelly excised in a brutal ritual that most omens don't survive. Those who do survive the horn cutting live in agony, forever marked by both their physical mutilation and their social exile. And here's where Morgott's tragedy begins to take shape. He was born into this. He didn't choose to be an omen. He didn't ask for the horns that sprouted from his body. He was simply born, and in that moment of birth, the Golden Order, the system that would define every moment of his existence, declared him worthless. Imagine being born cursed in the eyes of your entire civilization. Imagine your first breath being an act of defiance against a cosmic order that says you shouldn't exist. Imagine growing up knowing that everyone who looks at you sees corruption made flesh, that your body itself is considered evidence of wrongness, that you are, in the most fundamental sense, unwelcome in the world. Now imagine that this curse isn't random. It's not a monster that made you an omen, not some external evil you could fight or flee from. It's your own body, your own nature, something you can never escape or change. The curse is you, and you are the curse. This is the reality Morgott was born into. Before he could speak, before he could think, before he could choose anything about his life or identity, the Golden Order had already judged him and found him wanting. And unlike common omens who could be killed immediately, Morgott's royal blood meant he couldn't simply be disposed of. He had to be hidden, locked away, erased from history while still alive. A dirty secret buried beneath the capital's golden streets. The Golden Order's hatred of omens isn't rational. It's visceral, religious, absolute. It's the kind of hatred that doesn't require justification because it has been woven into the fabric of divine law itself. And this hatred, this systematic rejection, would shape every aspect of Morgott's life, even his most profound loyalty. Because here's the cruelest twist. Despite everything the Golden Order did to him, despite being born into a system that wanted him dead, Morgott would dedicate his entire existence to preserving that very system. He would become its greatest defender. And in doing so, he would inflict upon himself a suffering far worse than any external persecution. Section 3. Royal Blood. Hidden shame. Morgott wasn't born in some distant corner of the lands between. He wasn't the child of peasants or outcasts. He was born in the heart of power itself, in the royal palace of Leyndell, son of Queen Marika the Eternal and Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. He was, by every measure of lineage and birthright, a prince of the highest order. His blood was as royal as blood could be in the lands between, and it meant nothing. Actually, that's not quite accurate. It meant he couldn't be killed outright like common omen children. His royal blood was just significant enough to make his existence an embarrassment, rather than a simple problem to be solved with infanticide. So instead of death, Morgott and his twin brother Mohg received something arguably worse. They were hidden away, imprisoned in the depths beneath the capital, forced to live in the subterranean shunning grounds where no one would have to acknowledge their existence. Think about what this means from a family perspective. Queen Marika, the eternal goddess queen who reshaped the world according to her will, who shattered the very Elden Ring itself, who commanded the power to alter reality. This woman gave birth to 2 omen sons and chose to lock them underground rather than defend them. Godfrey, the legendary warrior who had conquered countless enemies, who had fought alongside Marika to establish the Golden Order, who was strong enough to become the first Elden Lord. He allowed his sons to be imprisoned in darkness. The item descriptions and environmental storytelling tell us that Morgott and Mog grew up in the shunning grounds, in the same festering depths where common omens were cast to die forgotten. Royal princes, raised among sewage and rot, surrounded by the corpses of other omens who hadn't survived the horn-cutting ritual, or who had starved in the darkness. This wasn't just neglect, this was active erasure, a conscious decision by the most powerful people in the world to pretend their children didn't exist. Imagine Morgott's childhood. Imagine being old enough to understand that you have parents, that those parents rule the greatest kingdom in the world, that they live in a golden palace directly above your head, and that they will never come for you, that they chose this imprisonment, that your very existence is so shameful to them that they would rather you suffer in darkness than risk the scandal of acknowledging you. You can see other royal children being celebrated, being trained, being groomed for greatness. Your brothers and sisters, Godwyn, Rani, Radahn, Rykard, Melania, Michaela, they get to live in the light. They get to be called demigods. They get to matter. And you get rats and darkness, and the knowledge that your mother, who literally has the power to reshape reality itself, chose to use that power to forget you. This kind of rejection cuts deeper than any sword. It's not persecution from strangers that you could understand, could rationalize, could rage against. This is rejection from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, from the two people in all the world who should have defended you. Your existence isn't just cursed, it's unwanted by the very people who gave you life. And here's where Morgott's psychology starts to form, where the seeds of his tragic loyalty are planted. He internalized this rejection. Rather than rage against his parents, rather than blame the system that imprisoned him, rather than recognize that he was the victim of profound injustice, Morgott seems to have concluded that he deserved this treatment, that he was, in fact, wrong. Wrong to be born, wrong to exist, wrong in every fundamental way. The curse wasn't something done to him. The curse was him. We see evidence of this internalized shame throughout Morgott's dialogue and item descriptions. He calls himself willful traitor when referring to his own omen nature, as if his body itself is a betrayal of the Golden Order. He hides his identity behind the name Morgott, unwilling to claim his royal heritage even as he defends the capital. Even when he finally becomes king, he rules as the grace given, desperately asserting that he too has been blessed, that he too belongs, as if saying it enough times might make it true. This is the psychology of someone who has accepted their oppressor's narrative completely. Morgott didn't just survive his imprisonment. He emerged from it believing that the system that imprisoned him was right, that he was the problem, that his suffering was just and appropriate, given his cursed nature. And that belief, that fundamental acceptance of his own unworthiness, would drive every decision he made for the rest of his life. His brother Mog made a different choice. Marg also grew up in the shunning grounds, experienced the same rejection, suffered the same isolation, but Mong's response was rebellion. He embraced his cursed nature, sought power outside the Golden Order, built his own dynasty in defiance of the system that rejected him. Mong looked at his imprisonment and said, "I will make them pay." Morgott looked at his imprisonment and said, "I will make them proud." One brother chose rage, the other chose loyalty, and somehow Morgott's choice ended up being far more tragic, far more destructive to his own soul. Because rage can eventually burn out, can eventually find satisfaction in revenge or transformation. But loyalty without reciprocation, that's a wound that never closes. It just gets deeper with every act of devotion, every moment of service that goes unacknowledged, every sacrifice made for people who will never appreciate it. Morgott's royal blood wasn't a blessing. It was just enough significance to make his suffering last a lifetime. just enough importance to make his rejection more complete. He was close enough to greatness to see it clearly, to understand exactly what was denied to him, but never close enough to actually touch it. He could see the throne from his prison, could hear the celebrations above while he rotted below, could know that in a different world, a fairer world, a world that judged people by their character rather than their bodies, he might have been celebrated as a hero rather than hidden as a shame. But he wasn't given a different world. He was given this one, and rather than fight to change it, he would spend his entire life defending it exactly as it was. Cruelty, injustice, and all. At some point between his imprisoned childhood and his eventual role as Leyndell's king, Morgott escaped the shunning grounds. The game never explicitly tells us how or when this happened, but the environmental storytelling and item descriptions paint a picture of a profoundly broken individual who, despite being freed from his literal prison, never truly escaped his mental captivity. We know that during the Shattering, the catastrophic war that erupted after Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring, Morgott emerged from the depths not as a revolutionary, not as a conqueror seeking revenge, not even as someone claiming his rightful place in the royal family. Instead, he emerged as a secret guardian, a veiled protector working from the shadows to defend Leyndell and the Golden Order from the various demigods and tarnished who sought to claim power. This is where Morgott adopts the identity of Morgott, the Fell Omen. Note the careful construction of this persona. Fell marks him as dangerous, as someone to be feared. Omen acknowledges what he is, his cursed nature visible to anyone who sees him. But Morgott is a false name, a disguise, a way of protecting the royal family from the shame of acknowledging their Omen son. Even in his role as defender, Morgott maintained the fiction that he wasn't really part of the family, wasn't really legitimate, wasn't really worthy of recognition. As Morgott appears in multiple locations throughout the lands between, always positioned to test or stop those seeking to reach the Erdtree. We first encounter him at Stormvale Castle, blocking access to the Academy of Raya Lucaria. We can also fight him at the northern entrance to Leyndell, once again guarding the approach to the capital. In both locations, he speaks with righteous fury about traitors and willful ambition, condemning those who would seek to claim the Elden Ring for themselves. But listen carefully to what Morgott actually says in these encounters. He calls us willful traitors, rails against foul ambitions, condemns the various demigods who sought power during the Shattering. There's genuine anger in his voice, real conviction, but there's also something else, projection. When Morgott condemns ambition, is he really talking about us, or is he talking about himself? When he rails against those who would claim power they don't deserve, is he thinking of us, or is he remembering his own desires, his own suppressed rage at the injustice of his situation? Consider what Morgott achieved during the Shattering. While his divine siblings tore each other apart in their hunger for power, Radahn fighting to hold back the stars, Ricard feeding himself to a god-devouring serpent, Ranni orchestrating the assassination of Godwyn, Millennia unleashing rot across an entire region. Morgott alone defended the capital, without seeking glory, without claiming power, without demanding recognition. He fought not for himself, but for the system, for the order, for a throne he would never truly be allowed to occupy, and he did it alone. While the other demigods commanded armies, built kingdoms, gathered followers, Morgott worked in secret, a solitary figure moving through the shadows, fighting an endless war against anyone who threatened Leyndell. No songs would be sung about his victories. No legends would celebrate his loyalty. He was the perfect defender precisely because he demanded nothing in return. Not glory, not acknowledgement, not even basic recognition of his sacrifices. This is heroism twisted into something tragic. In any other story, Morgott would be the underdog hero, the rejected son who proves his worth through dedicated service, who eventually earns the recognition and love he deserves. But this isn't that kind of story. Elden Ring doesn't reward devotion with fairness. It doesn't transform suffering into triumph. Instead, it shows us what happens when someone dedicates everything to a system that will never, ever give them what they need. Eventually, with most of the major demigods dead or withdrawn from the conflict, with Leyndell needing a ruler and having no other legitimate options available, Morgott claimed the throne, not as a conqueror, not as a revolutionary, but almost apologetically, as Morgott, the grace given, desperately asserting his legitimacy, his worthiness, his blessing by the very order that had rejected him from birth. Even his title is tragic. Grace given is defensive, almost pleading. It's not Morgott the Glorious, or Morgott the Brave, or even just Morgott, King of Leyndell. It's grace given, as if he needs to constantly remind everyone, remind himself, that he's been blessed, that he belongs, that his rule is legitimate, despite his omen nature. The title itself is an argument, a defense against an accusation no but Morgott is making. And once on the throne, what does Morgott do? He doesn't reform the system. He doesn't address the injustice of omen persecution. He doesn't free the omens still suffering in the shunning grounds beneath his feet. He doesn't even acknowledge his brother Morg or attempt reconciliation. Instead, he continues the same defensive war he's always fought, guarding the Erd Tree, condemning those who seek power, maintaining the status quo of a golden order that has clearly failed. By the time we face Morgott in the royal capital, he's exhausted. His opening cutscene shows him leaning heavily on his cane sword, his movements pained and weary. His voice carries the weight of decades of fighting, decades of being alone, decades of maintaining faith in a system that never reciprocated his devotion. When he says, "Thy kind are all of a piece, willful traitors all," he's not just condemning us, he's speaking from a lifetime of watching people pursue their ambitions, while he alone remained faithful. The tragedy is that Morgott's path from imprisoned child to secret guardian to reluctant king represents not growth or triumph, but an increasingly desperate attempt to prove his worth to a system that had already decided he was worthless. Every battle he fought, every tarnished he killed, every moment he spent defending the Golden Order was an act of self-harm disguised as devotion, proof that he had so completely internalized his rejection that he would literally destroy himself trying to earn approval that would never come. He escaped his physical prison in the shunning grounds, but he never escaped the prison in his mind, the one built from a lifetime of rejection and shame. And that prison traveled with him all the way to the throne room, all the way to his final moments, a cage of his own making that no amount of loyalty could ever unlock. There's a psychological phenomenon that occurs in victims of sustained abuse, particularly abuse from authority figures or caregivers. Rather than blame their abusers, victims often internalize the abuse as deserved, as punishment for their own inherent wrongness. This internalization becomes a twisted form of control. If I'm the problem, then theoretically I can fix myself and earn love. If the system is the problem, then I'm powerless, and that powerlessness is more terrifying than self-hatred. Morgott embodies this psychology completely. His unwavering loyalty to the Golden Order despite decades of rejection isn't strength of character. It's a trauma response, a coping mechanism for dealing with rejection so fundamental it began at birth. Throughout our encounters with Morgott, his dialogue reveals someone who has constructed his entire identity around serving the Order. When we fight him as Margit at Stormvale, he says, "I shall remember thee, tarnished, smouldering with thy meagre flame. Cower in fear of the night. The hands of the fellowmen shall brook thee no quarter." Later, in Leyndell, his dialogue is similar in tone. "We are the transgressors, the traitors, the ones who disrupt righteous order. He never questions whether that order deserves defending. The righteousness of the Golden Order is his axiom, his unquestioned truth. But the most revealing aspects of Morgott's loyalty come not from what he says about the Order, but from what he says about his siblings, the other demigods who abandoned or betrayed the Golden Order during the Shattering. In Morgott's boss room, we can find spectral images of his brothers and sisters, and if we pay attention during the fight, Morgott summons spectral versions of their signature weapons. As he does this, he condemns them all by name. Willful traitors, all. He calls Radahn and Rickard by their names with disgust. He speaks of the shattering demigods not with sadness at their fall, or even with understanding of their motivations, but with righteous condemnation. They are traitors to the Order, and therefore they are wrong. Think about what this means. These are Morgott's own siblings. Many of them experienced different forms of rejection or suffering under the Golden Order. Melania bore the curse of rot. Miquella couldn't grow to adulthood. Ranni was forced into a prescribed destiny. Rykard sought power outside the Order's constraints. Each of them had reasons to question the system, and most of them did question it, abandoning the Order to pursue their own visions of power or change. But Morgott, he condemns them all, not the system that created their suffering, not the Order that was so rigid it broke rather than bend, not Marika, who abandoned them to pursue her own inscrutable goals. He condemns his siblings, people who, like him, were victims of the Order's failures. This is misdirected rage in its purest form. Morgott won't direct his anger at the actual source of his suffering, because to do so would mean acknowledging that his lifelong devotion has been misplaced, that he's wasted his life defending something fundamentally unjust. So instead, he directs that rage outward, at anyone who threatens the Order, because as long as the Order stands, as long as he continues defending it, then his suffering has meaning, his life has purpose. His rejection was somehow part of a divine plan he's too cursed to fully understand, but faithful enough to serve anyway. This is the logic of internalized oppression. The system must be right, therefore I must be wrong. And if I'm wrong, then my suffering is just. And if my suffering is just, then the system deserves my loyalty. It's circular reasoning that traps the victim in a cycle of self-blame and devotion that benefits only the oppressor. Consider also who Morgott is most furious with. Not his siblings who sought power, but specifically those who defiled the Order or sought to supplant it entirely. Marg, who embraced the formless mother and built a counter-dynasty, seems to particularly enrage him. Rykard, who fed himself to a serpent and declared himself god-devouring, represents everything Morgott despises. These are people who not only left the Order, but actively created alternatives to it, suggesting through their very existence that the Golden Order isn't the only or best way to structure society. And that suggestion, that the Order might be wrong, might be unnecessary, might be just one flawed system among many possible systems, is intolerable to Morgott. Because if the Order is wrong, then his suffering was meaningless. If the Order is wrong, then he wasted his life defending injustice. If the Order is wrong, then he betrayed himself far more profoundly than any of his traitorous siblings ever betrayed the throne. So he clings to faith with desperate intensity. He defends the Erdtree even as it rejects everyone who approaches it, even as it burns with ghost flame, even as it becomes clear that the Order is fundamentally broken. He sits on a throne in a capital that's crumbling, defending an Erdtree that won't accept any champion, maintaining an Order that has already failed. And he does it because the alternative, admitting that he was wrong, that his loyalty was misplaced, that he deserved better than what he received, is too painful to contemplate. There's a specific kind of tragedy in watching someone slowly realize they've dedicated their life to something unworthy, and then watching them double down on that dedication, rather than face that realization. Morgott never quite reaches the point of conscious awareness. He dies still faithful, still defending, still believing. But you can hear in his voice, in his weary condemnations, in his exhausted fury, that some part of him knows. Some buried part of Morgott understands that he's fighting for people who would never fight for him, defending a system that declared him unworthy from birth, maintaining order in a world that has never been orderly or just for people like him. And yet he continues. Because loyalty, even misplaced loyalty, even loyalty that destroys you, can feel like the only form of control available. If he serves faithfully enough, perfectly enough, sacrifices completely enough, then maybe, just maybe, he'll finally be worthy. He'll finally belong. He'll finally receive the love and recognition he's been seeking his entire life. Except it never comes. It can never come. Because the problem was never Morgott. It was always the system. But acknowledging that would require confronting a truth more painful than any physical suffering. That he wasted his life on a lie. That his devotion was exploitation. That the order he loved never loved him back. So instead, he dies defending it. Still loyal, still faithful, still rejected. When we finally face Morgott in his throne room at the base of the Erd Tree, everything about the encounter is designed to be tragic rather than triumphant. This isn't a villain finally revealed. It's a suffering man at the end of his endurance, still performing the role of defender even as his body fails him. The cutscene that introduces the fight is crucial for understanding Morgott's state of mind. We see him standing in the throne room as we approach, and he's different from our earlier encounters with Morgott. He's no longer disguised, no longer hiding. His royal regalia is visible. His crown marks him as king, and he stands before the Erd Tree, the symbol of everything he's fought to protect. But look closely at his posture. He's leaning heavily on his cane sword. His movements are pained, and there's an exhaustion in his stance that speaks to decades of fighting alone. When he speaks, his voice is weary but resolute. Tarnished, thou art but a fool. It's not quite an insult. There's almost pity in the words, as if he's sad that we've come all this way only to fail. He continues. The Erd Tree wards off all who deign approach. We are all forsaken. That pause, we are all forsaken, is devastating. For a moment, the mask slips, and we hear not the righteous king, but the rejected son, acknowledging what he usually refuses to admit, that the Erd Tree, the order, the system he's dedicated his life to defending, has forsaken everyone, including him, perhaps especially him. But then he catches himself, reasserts his role. None may claim the title of Elden Lord. Thy deeds shall be met with failure, just as I. Another pause. Just as he what? Just as he has failed? Just as he has been met with rejection? The sentence trails off, incomplete, as if Morgott realizes he's about to admit something he can't allow himself to say. Instead, he transforms that vulnerable moment into threat. I will not suffer to live. The fight itself is remarkable in how it visualizes Morgott's inner conflict through his combat style. He wields a cursed sword, a weapon manifested from his omen blood, wreathed in red gold light that represents the very curse he spent his life trying to prove doesn't define him. The weapon is both beautiful and horrifying, powerful and tainted, a perfect symbol of Morgott himself, capable of greatness, but marked by something the world considers corruption. Throughout the fight, Morgott summons spectral weapons, the armaments of his siblings who betrayed the Order. He conjures Radahn's greatsword, Rykard's spear, other legendary weapons, wielding them with expertise despite having spent most of his life alone. There's something profoundly sad about this. Morgott has studied his siblings' techniques, learned to replicate their fighting styles, mastered weapons associated with demigods who lived in the light while he rotted underground. Did he learn these techniques by watching from the shadows? By stealing moments of observation during the shattering? Each spectral weapon is a reminder of the family that rejected him, the siblings who had the freedom to pursue their ambitions while he remained faithful. As his health drops, Morgott's fighting becomes more desperate. He summons more weapons, moves faster, fights harder, not with the confidence of a warrior who knows he'll win, but with the desperation of someone who knows he's the last defense against forces he can no longer hold back. There's no arrogance in Morgott's combat, no showmanship. He's simply doing what he's always done, standing between the Order and its enemies, fighting with everything he has, alone. When we finally defeat him, Morgott doesn't rage or curse. He doesn't condemn us or swear revenge. Instead, he says simply, "I see. Godric the Golden G, not fit even to graft Radahn, mightiest demigod of the Shattering. Malenia, the Severe, and vaunted in battle, the Empyreans, Ranni, Mikella, and Malenia, all of them shall fall." He's cataloguing his siblings, acknowledging their power, recognizing that all of them, even the mightiest, have been defeated or have fallen short. There's no satisfaction in this acknowledgement, no vindication. If anything, there's sadness, perhaps even a kind of bitter understanding that none of them were enough. Not Radahn with all his strength, not Malenia with all her skill, not even the Empyreans with their divine potential. And if they weren't enough, what hope did he ever have? Then comes the most heartbreaking part of his death speech. As his body begins to fail, as the Omen curse manifests across his skin in the form of spreading shadows, Morgott whispers, "Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction? In one so cursed as I? Mother, not the Golden Order, not the Erd Tree, not duty, or honor, or righteous cause." In his final moments, stripped of pretense and posturing, Morgott reveals what he's been seeking all along, his mother's approval. After everything, after decades of fighting, after countless battles, after serving faithfully when all others abandoned the cause, he still doesn't know if she would have approved. He dies uncertain whether even his mother, even Marika herself, would have sanctioned his rule, would have accepted him, would have loved him despite his curse. And the answer, implicit in the silence that follows, is probably not. Marika shattered the Elden Ring itself, broke the system she had established, apparently seeking to destroy the very order Morgott died defending. She imprisoned him as a child rather than protect him. In all his years of service, she never once acknowledged his sacrifices. The approval he sought his entire life was never coming. It was never even a possibility. After we defeat him, Morgott's body remains in the throne room, slumped and lifeless. But here's a crucial detail many players miss. After burning the Erd Tree and returning to Leyndell, now the Ashen Capital, Morgott's body is still there. Not only is it still there, but it's covered in roots, bound to the throne, pinned in place by the Erd Tree itself. Even in death, even after his faithful service, even after he gave everything to protect it, the Erd Tree treats him as just another corpse to be consumed, another source of nutrients for its roots. The game doesn't comment on this directly. There's no item description that explains it, no NPC that remarks on the cruelty of it. But visually, symbolically, it's devastatingly clear. Morgott's reward for a lifetime of loyalty is to be literally consumed by the thing he protected. His corpse used to feed the Erd Tree's roots, his body bound and broken beneath the golden light he could never truly join. His remembrance, the item we receive for defeating him, is called the Remembrance of the Omen King. Not the grace given, not the loyal, the Omen King. Despite everything he did to prove himself worthy, despite dying as a recognized monarch, Despite his desperate assertion of blessing and grace, the world remembers him primarily for his curse. The thing he fought his entire life to transcend, to prove didn't define him, becomes his defining characteristic even in death. We can trade his remembrance for one of two items: Morgott's cursed sword or the regal omen bear. The sword is a weapon that scales with dexterity and faith, physical skill and spiritual devotion, the two things Morgott embodied throughout his life. Its description tells us that Morgott used this cursed sword to denounce his fellow demigods, never wavering in his loyalty to the Golden Order, even as he wielded a weapon forged from the very curse the Order despised. The regal omen bairn is even more tragic. It's described as a fetish steeped in gold, used to summon vengeful spirits. The item description notes that the regal variant, weeping, sullied gold, reveals that within the child of royalty resides a keen intelligence. This isn't just flavor text. It's confirming that omens, even royal ones, even ones like Morgott, possess intelligence and capability that the Golden Order refuses to acknowledge. Morgott was brilliant, capable, worthy of greatness, and the Order never once cared. The final visual detail of Morgott's fight is his throne room itself. It's positioned at the base of the Erd Tree, the closest point to the divine that anyone can physically reach. Morgott sat there, on that throne, staring up at the Erd Tree every single day. He could see what he was defending. He could see the golden light, the divine presence, the physical manifestation of everything he dedicated his life to protecting. And every single day, that light refused him entry. The Erd Tree's thorns blocked his path. The grace he claimed to be given never once invited him inside. Imagine that torture. Imagine spending your entire life defending something you can see but never touch, protecting a place you can never enter, serving a god that you can never reach. The cruelest prison isn't one with walls. It's one where you can see freedom, can see belonging, can see acceptance, and know it will never be yours no matter what you do. That was Morgott's life. That was his throne room. That was his reward. He sat at the foot of paradise, closer to it than almost anyone else in the world, and it meant nothing because the final step, the step from defender to accepted, from servant to beloved, from faithful to welcomed, was eternally denied to him. When we leave Morgott's body behind and proceed to burn the Erd Tree, we're doing what he never could. We're moving forward, past the Order's barriers, into the divine space he spent his life defending, but could never enter. And in a way, we're proving what he refused to acknowledge, that the Erd Tree, the Order, the system he died for, was never as righteous or necessary as he believed. It can be burned, it can be challenged, it can be changed, but Morgott never allowed himself to believe that. He died defending a lie, faithful to the end, still seeking approval that would never come. And his corpse, bound to the throne by Erd Tree roots, serves as a monument to the ultimate tragedy of misplaced loyalty. Even in death, the thing you served consumes you, and you receive not honor but absorption, not celebration but consumption, not love but utility. The Omen King revealed is not a villain defeated. He's a victim who never realized he had the right to stop being one. Section 7. Morgott versus his siblings. A study in contrasts to fully understand just how exceptional and exceptionally tragic Morgott's loyalty is. We need to examine him in contrast to his siblings. Each of the other demigods made choices about how to respond to the shattering, to Marika's disappearance, to the collapse of the Golden Order, and almost universally, they chose ambition, rebellion, or transformation over blind obedience. Morgott alone remained faithful, and that faithfulness, when set against his siblings' various betrayals and transformations, reveals just how deeply internalized his oppression truly was. Let's start with the most obvious contrast. Morgott's twin brother. Both were born omens. Both were imprisoned in the shunning grounds. Both suffered identical rejection from their parents and from the Golden Order. They shared the same cursed blood, the same royal lineage, the same childhood trauma of being locked away while their golden siblings lived in light and luxury. They are in many ways the same person, given the same circumstances, but their responses couldn't be more different. Morgott, given identical circumstances, made the opposite choice. He looked at his curse and saw shame. He looked at the Order's rejection and saw justice. He looked at his imprisonment and concluded that he deserved it. Where Mohg found rage, Morgott found obedience. Where Mohg built alternatives, Morgott defended tradition. The same trauma, the same rejection, the same cursed blood, but one brother said, "I will change the world," while the other said, "I will prove I deserve to stay in it unchanged." Then there's Rykard, the Lord of Blasphemy. Rykard was born without obvious curses, raised as a proper demigod, even given significant power and position within the Golden Order as the praetor of the Erdtree's Inquisitors. He had everything Morgott wanted: legitimacy, recognition, a place in the system. And what did Rykard do with that privilege? He threw it away. He fed himself to a god-devouring serpent, declared himself Lord of Blasphemy, and built Volcano Manor as a haven for those who wanted to destroy the Golden Order rather than serve it. Rykard's blasphemy is significant because he had what Morgott never could: acceptance, legitimacy, power within the system, and he chose to reject it anyway. He looked at the Golden Order from the inside, saw its corruption and cruelty, and decided it wasn't worth preserving. His transformation into the serpent is grotesque and horrifying, but it represents a philosophical choice. Better to become a literal monster, fighting against injustice, than to remain beautiful while serving it. The contrast with Morgott is stark. Morgott, who had every reason to reject the Order, defended it. Rykard, who had every reason to maintain the Order, destroyed his relationship with it. One was cursed from birth and fought to prove his worthiness. The other was blessed from birth and chose to become cursed rather than uphold a system he found unjust. There's a question implicit in this contrast. Who really understood the Golden Order better? The cursed son who defended it without question, or the blessed son who had access to its inner workings and chose blasphemy? Rykard's transformation suggests he saw something in the Order's nature that made him conclude it needed to be devoured and destroyed, rather than reformed or maintained. Meanwhile, Morgott, excluded from the Order's inner circles, maintained faith in an institution he never truly understood, because he was never allowed close enough to see its full corruption. Consider Radahn, the mightiest demigod of the Shattering. Radahn pursued his own ambition during the war, sought to become Elden Lord through strength, and famously battled Malenia to a mutual stalemate that left him rotted and mad, but still defiant. Radahn's entire existence was about pursuing greatness for himself, learning gravity magic to continue riding his beloved horse, holding back the very stars to protect the lands between from fate, building a reputation as an undefeated warrior. Radahn's story is about someone who used his power and potential for himself, who pursued his own vision of greatness. Morgott had similar potential. We see this in his combat prowess, his intelligence, his strategic acumen. But where Radahn pursued glory, Morgott pursued approval. Where Radahn wanted to be remembered as mighty, Morgott just wanted to be remembered as worthy. The difference in ambition is staggering. One wanted to be the greatest, the other just wanted to belong. Then there are the Empyreans, Ranni, Miquella, and Malenia, each of whom represents a different form of rejection or transformation of the Golden Order. Ranni orchestrated the Night of Black Knives, killing Godwyn and setting in motion the events that would break the Golden Order. She did this specifically to free herself from the Greater Will's control, to escape the destiny the Order had prescribed for her. Ranni looked at the path laid out by the gods and said, "I will make my own way, even if it means becoming a doll, even if it means abandoning my body, even if it requires killing my own stepbrother." Her rebellion is calculated, ruthless, and ultimately successful. She creates an age of stars, an ending that represents freedom from the Golden Order's control. Miquella, cursed with eternal childhood, responded by trying to create his own order, the Haligtree, a sanctuary for those rejected by the Golden Order. He developed unalloyed gold to resist outer god influence, researched ways to cure his sister's rot, and actively worked to build something better than what Marika had created. Even Miquella's abduction by Mo was part of a plan to grow beyond his curse and create genuine change. Melania, bearing the curse of rot, remained loyal to Miquella above all else. Her loyalty isn't to the Golden Order, but to her brother and his vision of something better. When she nuked Caelid with scarlet rot during her battle with Radahn, she was fighting for Miquella's interests, not the Order's. Her faithfulness is at least directed towards someone who actually cares for her in return, toward a project aimed at improving the world rather than maintaining its injustices. Every single one of Morgott's siblings, even those cursed like him, even those who suffered under the Order, made choices that prioritized their own agency, their own vision, their own survival over blind obedience to a system that had failed them. Some sought power, some sought freedom, some sought to build alternatives, but none of them, not a single one, responded to the shattering the way Morgott did. By defending the status quo, by maintaining the existing order, by fighting to preserve exactly the system that had caused so much suffering. And here's the crushing irony. Morgott condemns his siblings as traitors, but he's the one who betrayed himself. He's the one who looked at his own suffering, his own rejection, his own valid rage, and suppressed all of it in service to his oppressors. His siblings at least had the integrity to recognize when a system was broken and to pursue alternatives, even if those alternatives were flawed or failed. Morgott's uniqueness isn't praiseworthy, it's tragic. He's not more loyal than his siblings. He's more damaged. His faithfulness doesn't represent strength of character. It represents a trauma so deep he couldn't imagine alternatives. While his siblings saw the shattering as an opportunity to reshape the world or claim power or pursue their visions, Morgott saw it as a crisis to be resolved by returning to the same order that had imprisoned him as a child. The study in contrasts reveals something profound about victimization and internalized oppression. Sometimes the most damaged victims aren't the ones who rage or rebel, but the ones who can't imagine that their suffering was unjust. Mong's darkness, Rykard's blasphemy, even Radahn's ambition. All of these represent a fundamental belief that they deserved better, that they had the right to pursue their own visions, that they were worthy of agency and choice. Morgott never believed he deserved better, and that belief, that fundamental acceptance of his own unworthiness, made him simultaneously the most loyal and the most tragic of all Marika's children. He was given the same circumstances, the same opportunities for rebellion or transformation, the same reasons to question the Order. But where his siblings saw a broken system, Morgott saw divine will. Where they saw opportunity, he saw duty. Where they chose themselves, he chose his cage. And in the end, which choice led to more suffering? Morgott died pursuing his own vision. Rykard died defending his blasphemy. Radahn died still mighty. But Morgott died still begging for his mother's approval, still uncertain whether he was ever worthy, still defending a system that had consumed his entire life without ever acknowledging his sacrifices. His siblings were defeated, but Morgott was broken long before we ever fought him, and that makes his tragedy complete. Throughout our exploration of Morgott's tragedy, We focused on how he internalized the Golden Order's rejection, how he transformed abuse into devotion, how he dedicated his life to proving himself worthy to a system that had declared him worthless from birth. But there's another dimension to his tragedy that's even more devastating. The Golden Order itself was already broken, already failed, already revealed as fundamentally unjust before Morgott ever took the throne. Everything he fought to preserve was built on lies and sustained by cruelty. And on some level he must have known. Let's examine what the Golden Order actually was by the time Morgott became its defender. This isn't speculation. The game's lore, item descriptions, and environmental storytelling make clear that the Order was never the divine, perfect system it claimed to be. First, consider Queen Marika herself, the goddess queen who established the Order and served as its figurehead. By all accounts, Marika didn't just fail the Order, she actively betrayed it. She shattered the Elden Ring, the fundamental source of the Order's power and stability. The game's opening narration tells us this directly. Queen Marika the Eternal shattered the Elden Ring. This wasn't an accident or an external attack. The goddess at the center of the Order, the one who supposedly embodied its perfection and divine authority, broke it herself. Why would Marika do this? The game suggests multiple possibilities: grief over Godwyn's death, rebellion against the Greater Will's control, a plan to free herself and the world from the outer god's influence. But regardless of her motives, the result is clear. The person Morgott was most loyal to, the mother whose approval he sought his entire life, had rejected the very Order he was dying to protect. Marika herself declared through her actions that the Golden Order was insufficient, flawed, unworthy of continuation. Think about what this means for Morgott's loyalty. He spent decades defending a system that its own creator had abandoned. He fought to maintain an order that its goddess had personally destroyed. Every battle he won, every tarnished he killed, every moment he spent guarding the Erd Tree was in service to something that even Marika, eternal, divine, perfect Marika, had decided wasn't worth preserving. And Morgott never acknowledges this, never questions why Marika shattered the ring, never wonders if perhaps the goddess knew something he didn't. He continues defending as if the shattering was an unfortunate accident rather than what it clearly was, a deliberate act of destruction by the Order's central figure. But Marika's betrayal goes even deeper. The lore reveals that Marika and Radagon are the same being, two personalities or forms of one god, and Radagon, despite being part of Marika, tried to repair the Elden Ring after she shattered it. The same being was at war with itself, one part breaking the Order, another part trying to maintain it. This internal conflict at the divine level mirrors the conflict in every character in the game, including Morgott. The tension between recognizing the Order's failures and desperately trying to maintain faith in it anyway. But here's what makes Marika's treatment of Morgott particularly cruel. She could have protected him. She had the power to reshape reality itself, to alter the fundamental laws of the world. If she had wanted to shield her Omen children from persecution, she could have. If she had wanted to change the Order's treatment of Omens, she had the authority. Instead, she locked Morgott and Mog underground, erased them from history, allowed them to suffer in darkness, while she maintained the system that declared them cursed. Marika's own actions proved that the Order was never divine mandate. It was choice, construction, policy that could have been different. The persecution of Omens wasn't cosmic necessity. It was a decision made by people with power who could have chosen differently. And they chose cruelty. They chose rejection. They chose to call children cursed, rather than question why their perfect Order produced children they considered abominations. The Erd Tree itself reinforces this betrayal. After the shattering, the Erd Tree refuses entry to everyone, not just the unworthy, but everyone. including those who have gathered great runes, including demigods, including tarnished who have proven themselves through impossible trials. The Erd Tree's thorns bar all entry. The divine light that supposedly graced the worthy now rejects all equally. This means Morgott spent years defending an Erd Tree that had stopped functioning as the Order claimed it should. The grace that supposedly validated worthiness was no longer being distributed. The tree that was meant to bless the faithful had closed itself off entirely. The entire theological justification for the Order, that it represented divine will, that grace marked the chosen, that the system reflected cosmic truth, had been revealed as false. And yet, Morgott sits at the base of this sealed Erd Tree, staring up at thorns that won't let him pass, defending a divine presence that refuses him just as completely as it refuses everyone else. And he never questions whether perhaps the system is broken, rather than the people it rejects. Then there's the uncomfortable truth about what the Golden Order actually did to maintain itself. The Omen persecution was just one aspect of its cruelty. The Order also hunted those who live in death, treating undeath as an abomination that needed to be purged. It oppressed Albinorics, artificial beings who were created, but then denied rights and dignity. It established rigid hierarchies based on divine grace that justified inequality as cosmic order. The entire system was built on categorizing beings as worthy or unworthy, blessed or cursed, legitimate or aberrant, and then using violence to maintain those categories. This isn't subtle. The game shows us omen killers, inquisitors specifically tasked with hunting down and murdering omen children. We see the results of their work in the shunning grounds. Piles of small corpses, children killed for the crime of being born wrong. The Golden Order didn't just passively reject omens, it actively murdered them, systematically, as policy, as righteous duty, and Morgott defended this. He defended the Inquisitors who would have killed him had he been born to anyone other than Marika. He defended the system that considered omen children disposable. He defended the Order that justified infanticide as purification, not because he was evil, but because he had so completely internalized the Order's logic that he couldn't see its cruelty as cruelty. He saw it as justice, as necessary order, as divine will being enacted in the world. The ultimate betrayal isn't that the Golden Order rejected Morgott. It's that the Order was exactly what it appeared to be. A system that divided people into worthy and unworthy, that justified cruelty through appeals to divine authority, that maintained power by convincing its victims they deserved their suffering. And Morgott, rather than recognize this truth, spent his life proving the Order right about him, that he was cursed, that he was shameful, that he needed to earn through impossible devotion what should have been his by right. Basic dignity, recognition, love. The game makes clear through environmental storytelling that Leyndell, the royal capital, was built on literal and metaphorical foundations of rejected beings. The shunning grounds beneath the city house, not just omens, but all manner of creatures the Order considered abominations. The city's beauty, its golden light, its architectural grandeur, all of it was built over a foundation of suffering, of people locked away and forgotten, so that those above could maintain the fiction of perfection. Morgott lived in both worlds. He knew the darkness beneath. He'd grown up surrounded by the forgotten, the rejected, the ones the golden city above had decided weren't worth acknowledging. And then he climbed up to that golden city and defended it, protected it, led for it, all while knowing that its beauty was predicated on the suffering of beings just like him. That's not loyalty. That's not even tragic heroism. That's a wound so deep it destroyed his ability to recognize his own worth, to understand that systems can be wrong, that divine authority can be false, that beauty built on suffering is just cruelty, with better aesthetics. By the time we fight Morgott, the Golden Order has failed completely. Marika is imprisoned or gone. The Elden Ring is shattered beyond Radagon's ability to repair it. The Erdtree rejects all who approach. The demigods are dead or mad or corrupted. The system has collapsed. And yet Morgott continues defending, continues believing, continues fighting as if loyalty alone could resurrect something that its own creator chose to destroy. The greatest betrayal of the Golden Order wasn't what it did to Morgott specifically. It was what it represented. A system that convinced its victims they deserved their victimization. That transformed cruelty into theology. That maintained power by breaking people so thoroughly they would defend their own oppression, even after the oppressors themselves had walked away. Morgott's tragedy is that he died defending something that was already dead, serving people who had already abandoned service, maintaining faith in a system that its own goddess had shattered, and he did it knowing. He had to know, on some level, that it was pointless, that the Order had failed, that his loyalty was going unreturned and unrewarded. But he couldn't stop, because stopping would mean acknowledging that his entire life was wasted, that his suffering was meaningless, that he had a choice all along, and made the wrong one again and again and again. So he died defending ruins and calling it service, protecting ashes and calling it duty, bleeding for nothing and calling it grace. The Golden Order's ultimate betrayal was that it succeeded. It broke Morgott so completely that even its failure couldn't free him. Morgott's story resonates so powerfully because it touches on something deeply, uncomfortably human. The psychology of seeking acceptance from those who have decided you're unacceptable, the cost of internalizing others' hatred, and the self-destruction that comes from blind obedience to systems that don't deserve our loyalty. His tragedy isn't just a fantasy story about a cursed prince. It's a mirror reflecting patterns of behavior that exist in our actual world, in our actual lives, in ways that make his story both universal and painfully personal. Let's start with the core dynamic at the heart of Morgott's character, seeking validation from those who will never provide it. This isn't unique to fantasy. We see it constantly in real human behavior. People staying in abusive relationships, hoping their partner will finally appreciate them. Employees working themselves to death for companies that view them as disposable. Individuals trying to earn love from parents who are fundamentally incapable of providing it. There's a psychological pattern here that therapists and researchers have identified. When validation is withheld, particularly by authority figures or systems we've been taught to respect, it can become more valuable, more desperately sought. The very fact that approval is being denied makes it seem more important, more worth pursuing. If they would just recognize my worth, if I could just prove myself worthy, if I could just do enough, be enough, sacrifice enough, then finally I'll receive the love I deserve. Except it doesn't work that way. Systems and people who have decided you're unworthy don't change their minds because you prove yourself. They simply move the goalposts, redefine worthiness to continue excluding you, or just ignore your achievements entirely. The validation isn't being withheld because you haven't earned it. It's being withheld because the system is designed to withhold it from people like you. And no amount of personal excellence will change structural prejudice. Morgott demonstrates this perfectly. He fights for decades. He defends the capital when all others have fled or fallen. He proves his strategic brilliance, his combat prowess, his unwavering loyalty. By any reasonable metric, he has more than earned recognition and respect. And what does he receive? Nothing. The Order doesn't change its view of omens. The Erdtree doesn't grant him entry. His mother never acknowledges his service. Even his title as king is defensive, uncertain, the grace given, as if he needs to constantly assert his legitimacy because deep down he knows it's being questioned. He could have done twice as much, fought twice as hard, been twice as loyal, and it wouldn't have mattered, because the problem was never his performance. The problem was the system's prejudice, And you can't overcome structural prejudice with individual excellence when the system is designed to maintain that prejudice regardless of evidence. This connects to a broader theme, the tragedy of internalized oppression. This is when victims of systematic persecution begin to accept their oppressor's narrative about them, when they internalize the hatred directed at them and start to believe they deserve it. It's one of the cruelest aspects of oppression because it turns the victim into an agent of their own oppression, makes them police themselves more harshly than any external force could. We see this in Morgott's self-hatred. He calls himself willful traitor. He hides his identity even when acting as defender. He condemns other omens, as if by differentiating himself from them he can prove he's one of the good ones, one of the acceptable ones. He has adopted the Golden Order's view of omens completely, including its view of himself. The voice in his head criticizing him, shaming him, telling him he's not worthy. That's not his voice. That's the Order's voice, internalized so deeply he can't distinguish it from his own thoughts anymore. This is why Mog's rebellion, however dark it became, represents a healthier psychological response than Morgott's loyalty. Mom recognized that the problem was external. The Order was unjust, and he would build something different. Morgott never reached that recognition. He kept the problem internal. He was flawed, and he needed to prove he could transcend his flaws. One brother externalized the conflict, the other internalized it. And internalized conflict is far more destructive because it's a wound you inflict on yourself, repeatedly, endlessly, with no possibility of healing, because you can never escape yourself. There's also something here about the psychology of abuse cycles, and why victims often defend their abusers. When someone has been mistreated by an authority figure, particularly from childhood, they often develop coping mechanisms that involve justifying the abuse. They did it because I was bad. They did it because they cared. They did it because it was necessary. These justifications serve a psychological purpose. They make the world feel more ordered, more controllable. If I was abused because I deserved it, then by being better I can prevent future abuse. If I was abused randomly, for no reason, then I'm powerless and the world is chaotic and terrifying. Morgott's loyalty functions like this. If the Golden Order's rejection was unjust, arbitrary, wrong, then his entire life has been a waste defending an evil system, and that reality is psychologically unbearable. But if the Order is right, if he really is cursed and shameful and in need of redemption, then his loyalty has meaning. His suffering has purpose. He's not a victim. He's a penitent earning his way back to grace. The fiction is comforting even as it's destroying him. And that's the insidious nature of internalized oppression. It provides the victim with a sense of control and meaning, even as it ensures their continued suffering. We can also see in Morgott's story a powerful illustration of what happens when identity becomes fused with obedience. Morgott doesn't just serve the Golden Order, he is his service to it. His entire sense of self, his whole identity, is built around being the loyal defender, the faithful one, the last guardian of Leyndell. Without that role, who is he? Just another omen, just another cursed being, just another rejected son. His service gives him meaning, gives him worth, gives him a reason to exist beyond being an embarrassment to his family. This is why he can never walk away, can never question, can never choose himself over the Order. To do so would be to lose his entire identity, to become nothing. And so he continues serving long past the point where it's rational, long past the point where it benefits anyone. Because stopping would mean confronting the void at the center of himself, where healthy self-worth should have developed. In our world, we see this pattern in people who define themselves entirely by their work, their service, their obedience to ideology or organization. They stay in jobs that exploit them because their identity is fused with their role. They maintain loyalty to failing institutions, because admitting the institution failed would mean admitting their loyalty was misplaced, and that would destroy their sense of self. They defend indefensible systems because their entire worldview, their whole understanding of meaning and purpose, is built on those systems being right. Morgott shows us the end point of that psychology. A person so fused with their obedience that they literally die still serving, still unable to imagine alternatives, still seeking approval from those who will never grant it. His last words aren't, "I was wrong," or "this was unjust," or even, "I tried my best." His last words are a question to his mother. "Wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so cursed as I?" Still uncertain, still seeking approval, still unable to assert his own worth independently of external validation. There's something particularly tragic about highly capable people destroying themselves through misplaced loyalty. Morgott isn't weak or incompetent. He's brilliant, powerful, skilled. Under different circumstances, he could have been one of the greatest heroes of the lands between. But all that capability, all that potential, was channeled into serving a system that would never appreciate it, defending people who would never acknowledge it, fighting for an order that had no place for him. This is the unique tragedy of talent and potential wasted, not because it was insufficient, but because it was directed toward the wrong ends. Morgott could have built something beautiful with Morg. He could have joined Miquella's Haligtree. He could have simply left, walked away, found peace and purpose elsewhere. He had the capability to do anything, and he chose to do the one thing that would guarantee his suffering, defend his cage, and call it duty. The theme of self-destruction runs throughout Morgott's entire arc. Every act of loyalty is an act of self-harm. Every battle fought for the Order is a battle against his own interests. Every moment spent defending the system is a moment spent reinforcing his own oppression. He is both the victim and the perpetrator of his tragedy, which makes it more painful because there's no external villain we can blame, no simple injustice we can point to and say, that should be different. The injustice is structural, systematic, internalized, and the victim has become complicit in maintaining it. This isn't to blame Morgott for his own suffering. That would be missing the point entirely. The blame lies with the system that was cruel enough to break him this thoroughly, with the family that rejected him instead of protecting him, with the Order that turned prejudice into theology. Morgott is a victim whose victimization was so complete, so early, so fundamental, that he never developed the psychological tools to recognize he had options, that he deserved better, that he had the right to choose himself over his oppressors. But understanding that doesn't make his choices less tragic, it makes them more so. Because we can see the chains even if he can't, we can recognize the cage even as he defends it. We can understand that he's destroying himself even as he calls it service. And that knowledge, that he could have been free if only he'd recognized he deserved freedom, makes his loyalty heartbreaking rather than admirable. The real-world parallels are uncomfortable because they're so common. How many people do we know who are destroying themselves for jobs that don't appreciate them? How many people stay loyal to ideologies or institutions that harm them because their identity is fused with that loyalty? How many people spend their lives seeking approval from parents, partners, or systems that will never provide it, because admitting the approval isn't coming would mean confronting how much time they've wasted pursuing it? Morgott's story is a warning. Blind obedience isn't virtue. Loyalty without reciprocation isn't noble. Serving systems that oppress you isn't duty, it's self-destruction. And seeking validation from those who have decided you're unworthy isn't perseverance, it's tragedy waiting to happen. The most painful aspect of Morgott's story is that his suffering was unnecessary. Not in the sense that someone could have easily prevented it, but in the sense that he had options, had alternatives, had the capability to choose differently. He could have saved himself. He just never believed he was worth saving. And that belief planted in childhood and reinforced through decades of rejection, killed him more surely than any sword. In the end, Morgott's greatest enemy wasn't the Tarnished who defeated him, wasn't his traitorous siblings, wasn't even the collapse of the Golden Order. His greatest enemy was the voice in his own head, telling him he didn't deserve better. A voice that sounded like divine truth, but was really just internalized cruelty. A voice he spent his life obeying, even as it guided him toward destruction. That's the tragedy of blind obedience. It doesn't feel like blindness from the inside. It feels like faith, like duty, like love. And by the time you realize you've been destroying yourself, you've often built your entire identity around that destruction, made it so fundamental to who you are that stopping feels like death. For Morgott, stopping would have been death. Death of the self he'd constructed, death of the meaning he'd found, death of the hope that maybe, someday, his loyalty would finally be rewarded. So he continued until actual death claimed him, still faithful, still loyal, still blind. And the system that broke him consumed his corpse without acknowledgement, without gratitude, without even the basic dignity of letting him rest in peace. Because that's what happens when you give everything to something that never valued you in the first place. It takes what you offer and demands more, until there's nothing left to take. Then it moves on, and you're just another forgotten sacrifice in foundations built on thousands of identical tragedies. Morgott deserved better. He deserved to recognize that. And the fact that he died without ever understanding his own worth is the final crushing note of his tragedy. Section 10. Morgott's death and legacy. When we leave Morgott's body behind in the throne room and proceed with our quest to become Elden Lord, it's easy to think of him as just another boss defeated, another obstacle overcome. But Morgott's death and its aftermath reveal layers of tragedy that extend even beyond his final moments, showing us how the world responds when its most faithful defender falls, and how little it cares. After defeating Morgott, the immediate aftermath is telling. His body slumps at the base of the Erd Tree, and we receive his remembrance. The barrier to the Erd Tree remains. Morgott's death doesn't grant us access, doesn't change anything fundamental about the world. He was the last king, the final guardian, the devoted defender, and his death simply removes an obstacle without altering the fundamental reality that the Erd Tree rejects everyone equally. This is important. Morgott's entire life was dedicated to protecting the Erd Tree and maintaining the order, and his death makes no difference to either. The Erd Tree doesn't collapse without him. The order doesn't crumble. Nothing changes except that Leyndell no longer has a king. And given how the city continues functioning, it seems no one particularly notices or cares. His decades of service, his countless battles, his unwavering loyalty, all of it becomes immediately irrelevant the moment he falls. But the real tragedy of Morgott's death unfolds later, after we burn the Erd Tree and return to Leyndell, now transformed into the Ashen capital. The city is covered in ash, partially destroyed, fundamentally changed, and there, in the throne room, Morgott's body remains. But it's been bound by the Erd Tree's roots. They've grown through him, pinning him to the throne, using his corpse as nutrients, literally consuming him to feed the tree he dedicated his life to protecting. Think about the symbolism here. Even in death, Morgott receives no rest, no honor, no acknowledgement. His body isn't buried with ceremony, isn't mourned, isn't treated with the respect typically given to fallen kings. Instead, the Erd Tree, the physical manifestation of everything he fought for, treats his corpse as just another resource to be consumed. The tree doesn't differentiate between Morgott and any other dead thing. It just feeds, growing through his remains with the same indifference it showed his service when he was alive. This is the Order's final statement on Morgott's worth. Even your corpse is just fuel. Even in death, you serve. Even now, You're not a person to be mourned. You're a resource to be used up. The roots growing through his body are the perfect visual metaphor for what the Golden Order did to him throughout his life. It consumed everything he had to give, took every ounce of loyalty and devotion and service, and provided nothing in return except the privilege of continuing to serve. And Morgott would probably have approved. That's the most crushing part. If he could have seen his own corpse feeding the Erd-tree roots, he likely would have felt satisfied that even in death he was still useful to the Order. He was so broken that being consumed after death would have felt like honor rather than desecration, because at least it meant the Order was still using him, still finding him valuable in some capacity, even if only as fertilizer. His remembrance tells us, remembrance of Morgott, the Omen King, hewn into the Erd-tree. The power of its namesake can be unlocked by the finger reader. Alternatively, it can be used to gain a great bounty of runes. A malformed star born in the lightless void far away. Once called the Grace Given, Morgott stood before the Erd-tree, keeping watch over the throne. Note what this emphasizes. He stood before the Erd-tree, keeping watch. That's his legacy. A guard, a watcher, someone whose importance is defined entirely by what he protected rather than who he was. Not Morgott the brilliant strategist, not Morgott the powerful warrior, not Morgott the son who deserved better, just Morgott the guard, the one who stood watch, the one who kept his post even when everyone else had left theirs. Even his description as Grace Given feels hollow in hindsight. He gave himself that title, desperately asserting his blessing, and the remembrance repeats it without examining whether grace really was given, or whether Morgott just claimed it loudly enough, and often enough, that people accepted the claim. The remembrance doesn't validate his grace. It just notes that he called himself Grace Given, which is very different from confirming he actually was. The fact that he's called Omen King in the remembrance is significant too. Despite everything he did to prove he was more than his curse, despite his entire life spent trying to transcend his omen nature, his defining characteristic in death is still the curse. The world remembers him as the Omen King first and foremost. All his service, all his loyalty, all his devotion, none of it was enough to make people see him as something other than his curse made manifest. We can trade his remembrance for either Morgott's cursed sword or the regal Omen Bairn. The sword is remarkable in both its power and what it represents. Its description tells us, Sword of Morgott, the Omen King, hewn into the Erd-tree, a twinned sword of gold and silver, imbued with the power of holiness. Morgott swore his service to the Elden Ring and to the Erd-tree, and so this sword became a sacred relic, capable of unleashing torrents of holy power. The weapon demonstrates Morgott's incredible skill. It's imbued with holy power, despite being forged from his cursed blood. He literally transformed his curse into a weapon of the very order that declared him cursed, weaponized his omen nature, in service to the system that considered that nature an abomination. It's a perfect metaphor for his entire life, taking what he was, what made him wrong in the Order's eyes, and forcing it to serve the Order anyway, as if by making his curse useful he could make himself acceptable. But notice what the description emphasizes. The sword became a sacred relic because Morgott swore service to the Erd-tree. The sword isn't holy on its own merits. It's holy because Morgott used it in service to holy things. His curse wasn't redeemed or transformed. It was just put to acceptable use. The distinction matters. Morgott didn't change the Order's mind about omens. He just made himself a useful omen rather than a disposable one. The curse remained a curse. It just became a curse in service to the right cause. The regal Omen Bairn offers a different kind of sadness. This item is described as a fetish steeped in gold, a catalyst used to summon vengeful wraiths. Its description notes that the regal variant differs from common omen bairns in subtle ways. The weeping gold sullies the eyes, but is said to reveal who is with child. More importantly, it tells us that within the child of royalty, matured in the golden furnace, resides a keen intelligence. That line, a keen intelligence, is heartbreaking. It's acknowledging what everyone in the story refused to acknowledge while Morgott was alive. He was brilliant, capable, intelligent, worthy of greatness not because he served faithfully, but because he was genuinely talented and competent. The curse didn't diminish his intelligence or capability. Being an omen didn't make him less than his siblings. He was royal in more than just blood. He had the mind, the skill, the leadership capacity of a great ruler, and none of it mattered. His keen intelligence was spent defending a system that would never acknowledge it. His royal bearing was wasted on a role where he had to hide his identity. His capability was channeled into service, rather than celebrated or rewarded. The item description is confirming what the entire story showed us. Morgott deserved better, was capable of better, but was never given the opportunity to be anything except the faithful servant of his own oppression. In terms of legacy, what does Morgott leave behind? There's no dynasty carrying on his name. He died without heirs, without even acknowledgement from his family. There's no reformed order incorporating his suggestions. He never questioned the order, so there were no reforms to propose. There's no school of warriors studying his techniques, no songs celebrating his victories, no monuments honoring his service. His legacy is his absence. After we defeat him, Leyndell slowly falls apart. The royal capital burns, becomes the Ashen capital, transforms into a place of death and ruin. One could argue that this proves Morgott's importance. His defense was the only thing holding the city together, but even that interpretation is depressing. He was so thoroughly consumed by his role that there was nothing left of him except function. Remove the guard, and the post crumbles. Remove Morgott, and there's nothing about him substantial enough to survive except the lack of someone doing his job. Compare this to the legacies of his siblings. Radahn is remembered as the mightiest warrior of the Shattering, holding back the stars themselves through sheer force of will. Ranni's rebellion continues even after her body dies. Her plan succeeds. Her age of stars becomes possible. Miquella's Haligtree remains, a testament to his vision of something better. Even Mog leaves behind a dynasty, a palace, followers who believed in his vision of a new order. Morgott leaves behind a corpse being eaten by tree roots, a sword that symbolizes weaponized self-hatred, and an empty throne in a burning city. That's the sum total of his impact on the world: absence and consumption. He defended so loyally and so completely that there was no part of him that existed independent of his role, and when that role ended, nothing remained. Even the NPCs in the game barely acknowledge him. Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, mentions Morgott only in passing, noting his presence as an obstacle, but showing no particular interest in his story or significance. Melina, our guide throughout much of the game, never comments on the tragedy of Morgott's loyalty or the injustice of his treatment. The world just moves on, as if the last king of Leyndell, the final defender of the Golden Order, the most loyal son of Marika, was just another boss to defeat, another name to catalogue, another obstacle overcome. There's something uniquely painful about a death that goes unmourned, a service that goes unacknowledged, a sacrifice that no one bothers to remember. Morgott gave everything: his childhood, his identity, his potential, his life, and in return, he got nothing. Not recognition, not love, not even basic acknowledgement of his sacrifices. He got to be used up completely, consumed literally and figuratively, and then forgotten. His death scene shows us a man finally asking the question he should have asked decades earlier. Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so cursed as I? But he asks it when it's too late for the answer to matter, when even if Marika could respond and said yes, I would have been proud, it wouldn't change anything. He's dying. The order has fallen. His service is ending, not in triumph, but in defeat. The question comes too late, and the silence that answers it is damning, because Morgott deserved to know, while he still had time to make different choices, whether his loyalty was appreciated. He deserved to hear, before he'd wasted his entire life on service, whether his mother regretted locking him away. He deserved acknowledgement before death, not the silent consumption of his corpse afterward. But he never got it, and that might be the most tragic part of his legacy. Not just that he was unloved, but that he died not knowing for certain whether he could have been loved. Still uncertain, still questioning, still hoping that maybe, if he'd just served a little better, sacrificed a little more, been a little more worthy, the approval he sought, his entire life would have materialized. It never would have. The system was never going to change. His mother was never going to acknowledge him. The order was never going to accept him as anything but a useful omen at best. But Morgott died without that certainty, which means he died still hoping, still faithful, still believing that maybe, somehow, his devotion would be reciprocated. It's the hope that kills you. If Morgott had known for certain he would never be accepted, maybe he could have walked away, found peace elsewhere, built a different life. But as long as acceptance seemed possible, as long as approval felt just out of reach, he could be kept serving, kept hoping, kept destroying himself in pursuit of something that was never real. That's his legacy, a cautionary tale about the cost of seeking validation from those who will never provide it, about the tragedy of serving systems that consume without reciprocating, about how internalized oppression can make you complicit in your own destruction. His corpse, bound by roots and forgotten by all, is the monument to blind loyalty that no one asked for and no one will visit. In death as in life, Morgott was used up and discarded, and the saddest part is that he would have considered that a worthy end, because even being consumed meant he was still serving, still useful, still valuable to the order that never valued him at all. Section 11. Conclusion and reflection. We began this exploration by asking what makes Morgott's story tragic. Now, thousands of words later, having examined his birth, his loyalty, his conflicts, his death, and his forgotten legacy, we can answer that question with painful clarity. Morgott's tragedy isn't what was done to him, but what he did to himself in response. He was given a curse at birth, yes. He was rejected by his family, imprisoned by the Order, denied recognition despite decades of service. All of that is unjust, cruel, worthy of condemnation. But the real tragedy is that Morgott internalized that cruelty so completely that he spent his entire life inflicting it upon himself. He didn't just survive his oppression, he became his own oppressor, more thorough and relentless than the Golden Order ever could have been. He took the voice that said, "You're worthless," and made it his own, lived by its judgments, sought its approval even after everyone else had moved on or fallen away. He defended his cage and called it duty. He weaponized his suffering and called it loyalty. He destroyed himself slowly over decades and called it service. Elden Ring is filled with tragedy, millennia consumed by rot, fighting battles that only spread the plague she wanted to cure. Radahn reduced to madness, eating corpses in a desert, while the stars he once held back threatened to fall. Ranni forced to kill her own stepbrother to escape divine destiny. Miquella kidnapped while trying to cure his sister. His grand plans for the Haligtree left unfinished. Every character in the game suffers. Every story ends in some form of loss or corruption or defeat. But Morgott's tragedy stands apart because it was so completely unnecessary and so completely inevitable at the same time. He had options. He had capabilities. He had, in his twin brother Morg, a living example of someone who chose differently and survived, built something new, found power and purpose outside the Order's constraints. Morgott could have left at any time, could have joined Miquella's Haligtree, which explicitly welcomed those rejected by the Order, could have simply walked away from Leyndell and found a quiet life somewhere far from the politics and conflicts that defined his suffering. He didn't lack opportunities for escape. He lacked the ability to imagine he deserved escape. And that's what makes his story so devastating. He was imprisoned not by bars or chains, but by his own inability to see himself as worthy of freedom. This is why Morgott resonates so powerfully with players who take the time to understand his story. We've all, at some point, encountered the pull of seeking validation from those who've decided we're unworthy. We've all felt the temptation to prove ourselves to people or systems that don't deserve our effort. We've all had moments where we wonder if maybe the problem is us, if maybe we just need to try harder, be better, sacrifice more, and then finally we'll receive the recognition we deserve. Morgott's story is a warning about where that path leads, to exhaustion, to self-destruction, to dying still uncertain whether we were ever good enough, still seeking approval that was never going to come. His tragedy asks us to examine our own loyalties, our own service, our own pursuit of validation. Are we defending systems that deserve our defense? Are we seeking approval from people capable of providing it? Are we so fused with our roles and duties that we've lost sight of our own worth, independent of what we provide to others? The game never explicitly tells us we're supposed to feel sorry for Morgott. It doesn't manipulate us with sad music or tragic cutscenes designed to make us cry. Instead, it presents his story through fragments, item descriptions, sparse dialogue, environmental details, and one heartbreaking death scene, and trusts players to piece together the tragedy themselves. This makes Morgott's story more impactful because we discover it rather than being told it. We have to pay attention, have to care enough to read the items and consider their implications, have to think about what his words and actions reveal about his inner state. And for those who do pay attention, who do piece together his story, the result is one of the most emotionally complex and devastating character arcs in any From Software game. Morgott isn't a villain you triumph over. He's a victim you're forced to defeat, because he won't let you past, because his loyalty has become so complete it extends even to stopping those who might actually change things, because he's guarding a system that doesn't want or need his protection anymore. There's a particularly cruel irony in the fact that we, the Tarnished, end up burning the Urge Tree and ushering in a new age, doing exactly what Morgott spent his life trying to prevent. From his perspective, we're traitors, willful destroyers of righteous order. But from our perspective, and from the game's broader narrative, we're doing what needed to be done, changing a broken system, challenging a failed order, bringing about transformation, even if it means destruction first. Morgott died defending stagnation. We succeed by embracing change. And that contrast suggests that perhaps Morgott's greatest failing wasn't his curse or his birth, but his inability to recognize that faithfulness to a broken system is just another form of betrayal. Betrayal of yourself, your potential, and your responsibility to make the world better, rather than maintain it in its brokenness. But can we really blame him for that failing? He was indoctrinated from birth. He never had the chance to develop healthy self-worth, or the psychological tools to recognize systematic injustice. He was a victim of circumstances so overwhelming, so early, so complete, that his choices were constrained before he was old enough to understand he had choices. This is where the tragedy deepens into something almost unbearable. Morgott's story doesn't have a villain we can simply hate. We can't just say, if only his family had been kinder, or if only the Order had been more just, because while both of those things are true, they don't capture the full weight of how systems of oppression work. The Golden Order wasn't an aberration. It was a functioning system that maintained itself through exactly the kind of indoctrination Morgott experienced. Breaking people so thoroughly they'll defend their own oppression isn't a bug in the system. It's a feature, a deliberate outcome that ensures the system's survival. Marika and Godfrey weren't cartoon villains gleefully tormenting their children. They were products of the same system, making choices within the constraints of what the Order demanded, perpetuating patterns that had been established long before them. The Omen persecution didn't begin with them and wouldn't end with them. It was woven into the fabric of the Golden Order's theology, its social structure, its understanding of divine will. This is what systematic oppression looks like, not simple villain and victim dynamics, but cycles of trauma that perpetuate themselves. Victims who become perpetrators, not through malice, but through broken understanding. Systems that convince people their suffering is righteous and necessary. And Morgott, caught in that system from birth, never had a chance to see it clearly enough to escape it. And yet, and this is important, acknowledging the systematic nature of his oppression doesn't remove his agency entirely, or make his choices irrelevant. He did have moments where he could have chosen differently. He did have a brother who demonstrated that rebellion was possible. He did have decades during which he could have questioned, could have sought allies among the tarnished or the other rejected beings, could have used his position as king to reform the Order rather than maintain it. The tragedy isn't that he couldn't choose differently. It's that he didn't, that he had been broken so completely. The choice never felt like a choice, that his loyalty felt like the only possible response even when alternatives surrounded him. He was imprisoned by walls he could have walked through, if only he'd known they weren't real. And that if only is what makes his story heartbreaking, rather than merely sad. The possibility of different choices, of better outcomes, of freedom and dignity and self-worth, haunts his entire arc because we can see it even if he couldn't. From Software has always excelled at creating tragic characters, but Morgott represents a particular kind of tragedy that feels especially relevant to contemporary audiences. The tragedy of those who defend the systems that oppress them, who can't imagine alternatives because their sense of self has been fused with their oppression, who die having never realized they deserved better. It's a tragedy that plays out constantly in our world. In people trapped in abusive relationships, exploitative jobs, oppressive ideologies, and Morgott's story, for all its fantasy trappings, captures something true and painful about how that psychological trap works. In our playthroughs of Elden Ring, we defeat Morgott and move on. We take his remembrance, maybe craft his sword, use his souls for levels, and continue our quest to become Elden Lord. The game doesn't force us to dwell on his tragedy if we don't want to, but for those who do stop and think about him, about his life, his choices, his death, he stands as one of the most fully realized tragic figures in gaming. Not because he has the most screen time or the flashiest cutscenes, but because his tragedy is written into every aspect of his presentation, from his defensive titles to his hidden identity to his final uncertain question to a mother who never cared to answer. Morgott, the Omen King, the grace-given, the last defender of a broken order, the loyal son of an absent mother, the faithful servant of a failed system. He died as he lived, seeking validation that would never come, defending what never deserved defense, serving those who never acknowledged service. His corpse, bound by roots and forgotten by all, serves as a monument to a question we should all ask ourselves. What are we defending? Who are we serving? And are we so fused with our loyalty that we've forgotten to ask if that loyalty is deserved? In the end, Morgott's story isn't just about him. It's about all of us who've ever sought approval from those who declared us unworthy, who've ever served systems that never served us back, who've ever wondered if maybe we just need to try harder, sacrifice more, be better, and then finally we'll receive the love and recognition we've been chasing. His story's message is both simple and profound. Some things aren't worth your loyalty. Some systems don't deserve your service. And some approval, no matter how desperately sought, will never come. Not because you're insufficient, but because the problem was never you to begin with. Morgott never learned that lesson. He died still faithful, still devoted, still seeking, still uncertain. And that's the tragedy. Not just that he suffered, but that he never understood he didn't have to. That freedom was always available, if only he'd been able to see himself as worthy of it. The Golden Order betrayed him not once, but twice. First by rejecting him, and second by breaking him so thoroughly that he would spend his life defending that rejection. And in defending it, he became the most effective agent of his own oppression, more thorough and relentless than any external force could have been. That's the tragedy of Morgott. Not what was done to him, but what he did to himself in response. And in that tragedy, we find a mirror, uncomfortable, painful, but ultimately meaningful, reflecting the ways we all risk becoming Morgott if we're not careful to remember our own worth, to question our loyalties, to recognize when we're defending cages instead of principles. His story asks us to remember, you deserve better, you have options, and seeking approval from those who've decided you're unworthy isn't faithfulness, it's self-destruction wearing duty's mask. Morgott never learned that, but we can. And in learning it, in recognizing his tragedy and choosing differently in our own lives, we honor him better than any monument or remembrance ever could. May his story serve as a warning, a reminder, and ultimately a gift. The gift of recognizing our own worth before it's too late. The gift of choosing ourselves, even when systems demand we sacrifice ourselves. The gift of understanding that some loyalties should be broken, some systems should be challenged, and some approval simply isn't worth the cost of obtaining it. Morgott the Omen King deserved better. So do we all. And unlike him, we still have the chance to recognize that truth and live according to it. That's the lesson his tragedy offers. That's the gift in his suffering. That's why his story matters. Not as entertainment, but as warning. Not as tragedy, but as teacher. Not as defeat, but as a mirror showing us what happens when we forget our own worth in pursuit of someone else's approval. Remember Morgott, learn from him, and choose differently. Because unlike him, we still can.